Hi, Dan.
Mitch, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Long week already.
Hopefully we'll get better.
We're not the stereotype that's out there.
Just getting rid of the background noise.
So I was diligently working on my massive spreadsheet budget that I inherited from Jen Giletti. And
Hopefully it's a good spreadsheet, but I don't envy you.
well, the problem was I filled in a bunch of numbers. And then today when I tried to open it, I got this thing. The file is corrupted and cannot be repaired.
Oh, man.
So everything I did the last 3 days, I have to redo.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Well, that's not that.
And you're laughing.
Well, if you didn't laugh, you'd cry. I learned that in the Navy.
It's the worst. Audits are easier than setting the budget. It's the worst time of the year.
Yeah, actually, I was talking with my wife. We were thinking, well, maybe we should change our fiscal year to correspond to the church year. That way, everything would be done before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and that would make sense as far as personal time.
Yeah. Should ruminate on that.
Yeah, well, it's possible to do. It's just
Yeah.
It's a pain in the ass from bookkeeping perspective, but it's, it can be done.
Well, I remember I was just at the tail end of the fallout from when they changed the government fiscal year, because it used to be the government fiscal year ended in June, on June 30th.
Right,
And
like
then-
all the municipals.
Right. And then they changed it back in the 70s to October 1st. And theoretically is to give Congress more time to do the budget. Now they haven't passed the budget on time since then, but
Well, we have lots of continuing resolutions, but
Yeah.
really no budgets.
so anyways, but I remember there was a gap there from the June to October 1st where we had an X year.
Yeah,
And so we actually had a
So-
separate fiscal year.
the process is to close out the fiscal year, and that's a fiscal year, whenever you decide, June, July, August, and then you start a new fiscal year and run through the end of it.
Yeah.
So it's a pain because it's more difficult to do your comparisons,
Mhm.
but it's only the first year that's horrible.
I think I'll suggest that to Marty and company and see what they.
Yeah, because you could, it could be August, it could be,
Oh, yeah.
the problem, I think, is when is a good time to have the annual meeting?
Right.
And August isn't because vacation,
Mm-hmm.
September isn't because of the start of school. So,
This would actually put the annual meeting in November.
if you started on November 1st, then the annual meeting would be in November.
Right.
But you'd be running a new budget like we do now. You'd be running a
Yeah.
new budget before the annual meeting.
Yeah, Mary, hi Danita, by the way. We're talking shop. Mary's church she had a church in northern New York, and their annual meeting was in June because the president was in Florida for the winter.
He was what?
In Florida for the winter.
Oh,
So basically the church calendar was built around this guy's schedule.
yeah.
He was present the whole time. I used to be present for like 20 years up there.
Ooh, boy, that's dangerous.
Yeah. Well. Hey, David.
Hey, hi. How you doing, Mitch?
Good. So you're talking. I can see you.
Yeah, you hear me?
Yep, all those good things.
How you doing, Diane?
I'm well. I was just telling Mitch, it's been a long week already.
Monday, it's only Monday. Well, it's Saturday for me. This is my
Saturday?
Saturday.
Well, because of the holiday, it's, everything is accelerated.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, we had to do the payroll early at college.
Yeah, we had to do
Yeah, you still-
payroll. I had to pay the bills.
Yeah, you still have a full week of work to do for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's Carol.
Yeah. I'm hoping to take some time on Wednesday and make some pies, but I don't know.
There we go.
Were you at the church today?
Was I? Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just because I was there earlier in the day. I was picking up the flash drive for Lee, and they had the guy from Next Tech there. Did you see him?
Yes,
He looked like he just was like on break from high school.
I know. He looks like he's 12,
I know.
but
I was like
he's
stunned when
very competent. So I'm going to go with that.
well, yeah, probably younger has something to do with it.
Well, yeah, it's intuitive for them, but we still don't have a fax. We haven't had a fax for 6 months.
All right. Is it broken or?
I don't know. It says the line is no good, so we have to call the phone company and see if they can resolve it. But it wasn't on Kathleen's list today. So maybe tomorrow, I'm hoping.
Yeah. Well, better the fax than the phone.
I don't know. I'm not enjoying the phone calls. We do have nice visitors though. I like that part.
Oh, okay.
People walking in, saying hi and, sitting down to chat. That's a nice thing.
Yeah, that's good. Nice to see people. Is Kathleen on vacation this week too?
She's not. She was into work today, frantically changing the bulletin for Sunday because a baptism got added in, and she had done them weeks in advance, and now she has to add in because she's very organized. She's really good at that job.
Yeah.
And then, oh, okay, well, let's just change everything.
Yeah.
Who's getting baptized? Anybody we know?
Hal O. Do you know Hal Oberg? It's his
Yeah.
granddaughter,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jessica's daughter. So it'll be fun. I love baptisms.
Yeah. Is Gina on vacation all this week?
Gina's on vacation. She's with her kids. I want to go back and visit my kid. So I'm very envious.
Yeah.
Well, here we are.
There she is.
There's Dale.
Hey, Carol.
Hi there, Dave, and everybody. Good
How
to
you
see
doing, Carol?
I'm good. I'm doing good. And Rudy is too.
Oh,
That's good to hear.
any profound thoughts for us tonight yet?
You gotta give me a little input. Then I'll come up with something. I will.
Oh, okay. You always do. I figure you could give us something starting out of the gate.
Well, my input is doing the readings in advance is really difficult. So I come to you unprepared.
That's okay.
Yes.
Oh, you know what was funny this week? I was looking at Psalm 93, comparing it to the Jewish Bible and our Bible.
Yep.
But then I went and I had the Jewish Bible out and I looked at something else and reading, oh, there's that in Mark. And I started looking in the Jewish Bible going, where's Mark? I said, oh, you fool. I picked up the wrong Bible.
Oops.
Yeah, where's Mark? I like that. That's good.
Yeah, I was like,
Dave time traveling.
it ain't in here. Yeah.
That's
Looks like my wife is struggling trying to get the.
That's very sure. Is she falling off her chair or is what's going on over there? She's with
Well,
you.
we've got, we have
There she
me,
is.
Hey.
there I am, and there she is.
Oh, hello, Edna. And then she's running away.
They kind of levitate.
And you're all in the Cornell Library.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I don't know how we got in the library, but that's what he put us in
Oh, I
today.
see Edna.
Yes, you do see Edna.
Yeah, good.
That's good.
Bobbing up and down.
So I will, so if everybody's curious about her, I will let her tell her story as to where things are and how she is.
That would be great.
You're on,
Well,
Esther.
I'm doing very well. I saw the surgeon today. He took some x-rays, says everything was good. Start physical therapy. Everything
Good.
is, except I can't drive.
Ugh.
Do
Well,
you
it
have a
seems you-
ride to the doctors, Edna?
Did I drive to, no, I took Uber to the doctor's.
Oh, the Uber. Oh, geez. I'll be more than happy to take you to the doctors, but I'm taking somebody tomorrow. I don't know what time. No, not tomorrow. Wednesday, I'm taking somebody to the doctors. You need a
Well-
ride tomorrow?
No, Dale, I'm not going to the doctor again until 5 weeks.
Okay.
Go drive yourself.
And then I should be driving myself.
Oh, all right. Well, if you need a ride, then please give me a call.
Okay, thank you, Dale.
All right, I'm happy to do it.
I'm kind of stalling for time here. I wanted to give a chance for, we don't have
Helen.
Helen. Yes, thank you. We don't have Helen, and I don't know if Janet
Ray-
is coming in.
Okay, Ray and Penny are on travel. Right?
Yeah, Ray and Penny are traveling, so they won't be here the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I had difficulty getting in tonight. It
Yeah, I
took
know. I
me-
noticed you were struggling.
Yeah, just wouldn't let me in.
Hmm.
It wasn't responding.
Well, you're nice and clear now.
Yes.
So. Well, one of the things I was looking at the text, which we're starting with Genesis 12. So keep in mind what's been going on so far is that basically the over the view of the Bible, the narrative is really focused on like everybody, all of creation. And then really in chapter 12 is where it kind of narrows down to this one group, clan, family of people. And in the footnote for the Jewish Study Bible, one interpretation they give is that it's page 30 if anybody wants to follow along, but the universalism that marked Genesis chapters 1 to 11 having now failed, that's the word, failed, the Lord begins anew, singling out one Mesopotamian,
Let's go get our teeth.
in no way distinguished from his peers as yet, and promising to make him a great nation, not numbered in the 70 nations of chapter 10. So the point is that I guess I hadn't thought about this until now, that one reason God sort of just decided on Abraham is that the whole idea of the universal, focusing on it had failed. So now he's just going to focus on this one group. And I thought that was an interesting way to read that. I'm not sure if I agree with it, but so tonight we're going to have the next couple nights we'll have Professor Cohen. So tonight he will talk about Abraham and Isaac, and then next week we'll talk about the other guy, Jacob and Joseph. And so that's where we are. And then the following week, I believe, is December 6th. So I have a lecture that Professor Cohen gave on the origins of Hanukkah. So, and I'll be sending out to you, I will send out the appropriate parts of Maccabees. So if you want to read that, you can look at it. That is actually going to be broadcast as off of YouTube. video, so it's not quite as good as what the one we've had, but the sound is good, so you can make out what he's saying.
I can't get over Hanukkah's upon us.
Yeah.
Next couple days is coming.
So
What about it? What is it?
So does anybody have any questions?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
We're
So I
ready.
think,
I don't know.
did I hear something?
No, I said no. I don't have it. No.
Okay, I think, okay, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mute people's mics.
Mm.
Okay. Next thing I'll do is share the screen. First, I'll share the sound.
Good morning. Morning. Okay, now we're starting the lecture, so say good morning. Okay, so we finished our introduction to the book of Genesis. We finished discussing the documentary hypothesis. It will come up again from time to time, but it's now in the background, precedes the background. Now we're going to spend our energies just working our way through the Torah, and beginning with the book of Genesis. So the book of Genesis we have in order once we get past the primeval materials, Genesis chapter 1 through 11. Beginning with chapter 12, we have four main figures. Abraham, about whom we'll be talking about today. Abraham, his son Isaac. Then there's that other son Ishmael, we don't talk about terribly much. Then we have Jacob and his brother Esau, about whom we don't talk very much. And then Jacob has 12 kids, 12 sons, but the one we talk about most is Joseph. So from a literary point of view, the actual main figures here are Abraham, Isaac hardly at all. I admit from a literary point of view, Isaac is a disappointment. So it's really Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph that will now fill up the rest of the book and various other characters around them, and then we'll fill up the book of Genesis from chapter 12 through its conclusion in chapter 50. I want to get out of the way a question that we can't answer anyway, and that the question is historicity. We understand that the first chapters, Genesis 1 through 11, these stories are mythic. Some readers, of course, will take them as literally true, but I don't think the narrators themselves would necessarily agree with that characterization. And certainly the creation of the world, if that's not a mythic story, I don't know what is a mythic story. What is a mythic story, class? Does myth mean that I'm dismissing these stories as false? Is that what I'm trying to say when I call them a myth? No, of course not. I took Religion 101. I know that myth means it's a sacred story told by a society or a civilization by which it reflects the core fundamental values of society, which we understand how that society understands the world, understands reality, and expresses it in narrative form. That's what a myth is. So the creation stories are mythic stories. They show us how the people of Israel, right, understood the world, understood where the world came from, understood the core values of society. Right, as I've emphasized over and over again, the creation stories emphasize that the world is a moral place with a moral God and a moral order. Whether that's true or not is your business. That's what the story, so says Shaye Cohen, that's what the story is teaching, or one of the many things these stories are teaching. In that sense, it's mythic. Similarly, Noah and the flood. Do I believe that that Christian groups should go off and look at Mount Ararat in Armenia, looking for traces of Noah's Ark? Well, if you ask Shaye Cohen, the answer is no. You can do better things with your money than that, because the odds of finding the remains of Noah's Ark are really remote, considering that there probably never was such a thing. Because again, that again is to take the story as if it were a literal story, as if it were a historical narrative in our sense of the word historical. So we understand these opening stories, the opening chapters of Genesis are of this quality. But starting with chapter 12, we now turn completely different. The focus of the narrative is different, and the nature of the stories are different. These stories, you read the stories, they feel, sound, look like real stories about real people in real situations. We've lost this cosmic mythic quality. So the question now arises, of course, well, was there a man named Abraham who one day packed up his bags, left Mesopotamia, and went to the land of Canaan? And various adventures follow. Are these stories true? Historical? Well, here again you have to say they're not mythic in the same sense that the creation of the world story is a mythic story. But on the other hand, are they true? So, modern scholars have argued this point endlessly. The trend nowadays, of course, is to see these stories also as mythic, legendary, the metaphor, I don't know what to call it, folk tales, folk stories. That's the general trend nowadays. So Kugel discusses, there was once a trend not too long ago, led by Professor William Foxwell Albright of Johns Hopkins, right, who argued that no, these stories are fundamentally true. Namely, the realia, the details, the incidental facts that come up along the way, these are all true, and some of them he thought were verifiable. Okay, that view is much out of fashion. And now for me in this class, what we're doing here, frankly, I really couldn't care less. In the sense that I can't prove it, I can't disprove it. The only thing that I have is the text. And my job is to understand what the text is saying. Whether there was a man named Abraham, and whether he in fact sired a son named Isaac, and whether his wife was 90 years old at the time, well, I don't have to comment on the historicity of that. It doesn't matter to me. It may matter to you. That's fine. You'll see Kugel also wrings his hands somewhat on this. We'll come back to that in a few weeks. Okay, so can we not worry about the historicity of these stories? Can we agree among ourselves that whether stories are true or not is not the right question to ask? The right question to ask, as always, is what do the stories mean? What lessons do they wish to impart? What do we get out of the story? Yes, Matt?
Yes. So if the stories in Genesis 1 through 11 are not true, what is, or not factual,
yes.
What is the point then of Genesis 5 and Genesis 10 with all of these detailed lists? They
all those
seem
genealogies.
very factual.
Yes, all those genealogies, those tables. Well, genealogies might serve to give you a genealogy. You want to know who is the father of whom, or who begat whom. These are known as the begats. So-and-so begat so-and-so. On the other hand, we also understand that genealogies, and this was discussed in Kugel, I think, often have other functions as a way of establishing filiation, a way of establishing credentials, a way of establishing authority. And in this case, it's probably somebody, ancient Israelites, attempt to work out chronology. Details of which we don't need not go into. In any case, okay, we need to go into. So I think we have here a series of begats to show how the world evolved. So that narrator may well have thought he was narrating something factual. I, as a reader, can respectfully disagree with that narrator. I can show you that it's not really factual because it's obviously these are artificial constructs, these lists. Well, let's go back to the question you mentioned last week. Shaye, I'm not talking too much. Quick, okay, quick, I promise we'll go right to Abraham in just a second. Right, the question about whom did Cain marry? In other words, this is not real. These are not real genealogical lists because so much data is simply not there. The narrator is giving you what the narrator wants to give you. No more, no less. It's not a real genealogical list. Because if it were, I respectfully suggest, I'd like to know who these women are. Where do they come from? Well, from the narrator's point of view, they're just women. I don't have to tell you, because they're just women. That's his perspective, not mine. His perspective, not mine. Right. That's why they're invisible. It's not a real genealogical list. Okay, think about that. Okay, let's move along. Okay, good, very good question. Thank you, whoever asked that question. Okay, so now we're going to shift to Genesis chapter 12. I'm leaving the historicity. We don't have to ask that anymore. I've taken care of that problem. We're trying to understand what these stories are, and they're wonderful stories. The stories are, some of them are beautiful, striking, amazing. Some of them are horrifying. We have wonderful stories coming up. Okay, in the shift between Genesis chapter 11 and Genesis chapter 12, the narrator is moving, changing focus completely. We go from the universal to the particular. Genesis 1 through 11, God creates the world. We have the flood, the entire world. We have the Tower of Babel, and the human beings are scattered throughout the face of the earth, it says, on the face of the whole entire earth. Then all of a sudden in Genesis chapter 12, God speaks to Abraham. And Abraham here is not the savior of humanity the way Noah is. Abraham is just a guy. And God says, pack up your bags, take your stuff, take your wife, your cattle, everything else, and move. And from this point on, Genesis chapter 12, down through, I would say, more or less, the end of the entire Hebrew Bible, the end of Second Chronicles. If you follow the Hebrew Bible, that's the last book, and the Second Chronicles. The focus of the text is almost always, almost exclusively on Abraham, his descendants, and the people of Israel who emerge from this clan. We have, we might say, is a narrowing of vision. What's extraordinary is not that we have this narrowing of vision. At this point, this story becomes Israelite. It's the story not of humanity at large, but the history of the people of Israel. But what I find extraordinary is that the narrator doesn't tell you. The narrator doesn't tip you off. The narrator does not explain how we understand this juncture between Genesis 1 through 11, then Genesis 12 and on. But it's striking and cannot be missed. The question everybody asks is, so Abraham is the progenitor of this new people, the people of God, or the Israel of God, to use the language of Paul, Israel of God. Why Abraham? Why does he get the role of progenitor, of patriarch, of founder? Why Abraham? Noah, we're told, was the most righteous man in his generation. As the sages observe, they may not be saying very much because his generation was thoroughly corrupt. Okay, but nonetheless, he was the most righteous man who could be found. In that time and place, that's the best you could do with Noah. But Abraham, what qualifications does he have for the job of patriarch? On this point, the text is amazingly silent. We're not even told Abraham is righteous. We're simply told God one day spoke to Abraham and said, go forth. Lech lecha. As Kugel discusses, later readers were much puzzled by this fact. And what did they do? They made up something. The text doesn't tell us why Abraham deserves this status, so we'll tell you. So they made up all kinds of stories, and some of these stories are ancient. If you went to Hebrew school, I'm sure you heard the story that Abraham one day smashed his father's idols in his father's workshop. It's an ancient story. The story goes back to the 2nd century BCE. Right? The point of that story is to show that Abraham at a young age recognized the falsehood of idols, the falsehood of idolatry, and recognized the truth of the one God. It's a beautiful story. It's a wonderful story. The only small problem is it's not in the book of Genesis. Right? But to understand what the narrators are doing, they're trying to supply something which is conspicuously missing which is, who is Abraham? Why has God chosen him? What's special about Abraham? The narrator omits all that, and I'm not quite sure how to explain it. For Christians, at least, the answer is provided by Paul. Christians, at least, you have the discussion in Galatians, which I did not give you in the lecture notes, but it's there in Galatians, in which Paul seizes upon this verse, Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. And Abraham, believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Abraham then becomes the paradigm of faith. Abraham is the first believer, and thereby Abraham shows the superiority of faith over the works of the law. All right, that's the book of Galatians. Take my biblical literacy class and we'll come back and talk about that. It's probably true, too, that the original meaning of the verse is probably not belief in the sense of accepting as true something which is not demonstrable, as opposed to it probably really means Abraham put his trust in the Lord. Abraham relied upon God. That's probably what Genesis 15:6 means. That's what the word amin means in biblical Hebrew. Not to believe, but in the sense of have trust in, have confidence in, have faith in the sense of I can rely upon you. Okay, but that verse, at least for some people, provided the clue that Abraham was the first monotheist, as we sometimes hear that expression. That, though, as I said, comes not from the Torah itself, but from a certain way to read it, as well as a healthy dose of imagination of its readers. Okay, so from this point on, we have the story of Abraham. Abraham, his progeny, his family, his clan, tribes, people. That's where we're going, from Genesis chapter 12 and onward. Okay, so today I gave you Genesis chapter 12 through 22, which are the bulk of the stories about Abraham. Not all, but almost all. And here in the handout, I give you a list of what the themes of these chapters are. I don't see no reason to go over that. Just read it, then you'll see what they are. The interesting thing is, even in these series of stories, we have duplications. This brings us back to the problem of the documentary hypothesis, i.e., an attentive reader will notice right away that certain settings or situations seem to recur. So, wife-sister motif. Every reader will notice that this seems to happen twice over to our father Abraham. Abraham comes into a rough neighborhood. He's afraid, the men here, no, Sarah, I just noticed that you're a very beautiful woman. I just noticed, right? So the men here are pretty rough. If they see that you're my wife, they'll kill me and take you. So I'm going to protect you by claiming that you're my sister. The story gets a little weirder very quickly here. How does that protect Sarah? I don't know. But I know it'll protect me. This way, they won't kill me. They'll just take you and they won't kill me. So you'll go along with that, right? And Sarah says, sure, Abe, whatever you say. No problem. Right. So, of course, things transpire exactly as Abraham suspected. The local goons take Sarah and drag her off to the palace. But not to worry, the Lord protects her. And everything turns out okay. That's the story. It's a weird story once, it's a weirder story twice. But there it is. We have a repetition of the story, and many people have tried very hard to figure out what's going on with this wife-sister motif. Right? Then Kugel will give you a summary of Mr. Albright, who is convinced that we have here, lurking beneath here, is a genuine ancient Near Eastern institution, which nobody believes anymore because we think Mr. Albright misinterpreted the key text, and it doesn't make any sense. It's completely irrelevant in context anyway. So it's a wife-sister story, but we get it not once but twice. And actually, if you look at Isaac, you get it a third time. So if you are a good modern Bible scholar, how are you going to solve this iteration? So you could either say, well, the details are different, so I guess it happened twice. That's what you would say if you're a traditionalist reader. Yeah, the details aren't the same. It must have happened twice. If you're a modern Bible scholar, what do you say? Of course, that's what you would say. One is this source and one is that source. That's how you solve the problem, right? By saying that these come from different sources. The fact that R now emerges as an idiot is a problem modern Bible scholars don't discuss. Didn't R notice he was telling the same story twice? Duh, right? Didn't R notice that there's a problem? Right, so you have to start saying now, well, no, R knew there was a problem, but he couldn't do anything about it because these stories were already sacred by the time R got there. In other words, R turns out to be just a staple and paste kind of guy, which strikes me as wrong. R is doing a lot more than scissors and paste and stapling. Okay, it's a problem. Anyway, that's how a modern Bible scholar would approach it. So that's one repetition. Another obvious repetition that any reader will spot is the expulsion of Hager. Who is Hager? Hager is the handmaiden of Sarah. Who is Sarah? Sarah is Mrs. Abraham, right? But Sarah is barren. I'll come back to that. Sarah is barren. So she gives her handmaiden Hager over to Abraham, thinking that, by some Near Eastern logic, that the child that Hagar will bear will somehow count as Sarah's, because it's her handmaid. This is not hubby sleeping with the maid. This is husband taking handmaid as a formal kind of legal arrangement. Okay, but of course things don't turn out as you thought, because Hagar gets pregnant and then she says to Sarah, look, hey, I'm fulfilling my maternal duty, how about you? Sarah gets insulted and says, get that hussy out of my house. I'm loosely paraphrasing the story. Right, get the hussy out of my house, and this happens not once but twice. What is one to do? Similarly, how did Beersheba get its name? Now the most important one, I think, of these repetitions are the two covenants. Genesis 15 and Genesis 17. In the story, there are two very different covenantal moments between God and Abraham. One is Genesis 15, which is discussed at some length by Kugel, the so-called covenant between the sections, all right, in which God and Abraham make a deal. God says, I will make you the progenitor of a mighty nation. At the time, this was not true, so this actually meant something to Abraham. I will give you this land. I'll come back to that. I will give you this land. And in return, Abraham, you do what I say. And Abraham says, okay, now let's sign. Or as Kugel very cleverly says, God, can I get that in writing? Right, let's sign. So what does God do in Genesis chapter 15? Right, he instructs Abraham to take some animals, chop them in half, put their two halves on the ground, and each of the two parties walks through the sundered animals. Well, Abraham does, and God does that by some pillar of cloud and fire and smoke and something a little mysterious. That's what happens in Genesis 15. And when that's done, you have a deal. The fancy word for a deal is covenant. The Hebrew word is brit. We have a covenant between God and Abraham, who said that this land will be yours, will belong to your progeny someday, not now. You have to wait 400 years. 400 years' time, it'll be yours. Remember, they lived longer in those days, so it didn't seem quite as long. Right, 400 years, it's yours. That's Genesis 15. Genesis 17 has exactly the same motif. Namely, God promises Abraham, I'll make you the father of a mighty nation. They will come and inherit this place. This land of Canaan will be yours. And in return, all I'm asking for is a little piece of skin. The foreskin. Circumcision. So Genesis 15 focuses on this mysterious ritual discussed by Kugel of slicing animals in half and then marching through the sectioned pieces. Whereas Genesis 17 also take out a knife, but instead of chopping animals in half, you're chopping off the foreskin from the male member. And also it's a covenant. Look at it, this is not two different versions of the same thing, it's two different stories, and yet it's the same story. Modern Bible scholars, predictably enough, say, well, one is from J and one is from P. And here I would say they're onto something, because these stories reflect different religious values. One of them sees circumcision as an essential marker of relationship between God and Israel. That's Genesis 17, or P, whereas Genesis 15 does not. Not that it denies it, it simply doesn't mention it. It's not there. So here are two different covenant stories. I'll come back to covenant in due course. Two different covenant stories with different religious messages, different values. If you are a traditionalist, of course, you say, yes, he has two covenants. He did it one way this way, another way that way, two different stories. I don't understand what the problem is. If you're a traditionalist, then that will be fine. There's no contradiction. There's two different stories. Okay, so in other words, we're reading these stories about Abraham, but it's not clear whether we're reading a single thing when we read these stories, or in fact we're reading a combination of different things that have been compiled for us by this mysterious redactor. Good, then let's go look at some of the major themes that are in these chapters. Themes within these narratives. Main theme within these, one of the main themes in these narratives is the patriarchs themselves, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph. Although Joseph's a little separate. Those Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are people who we might say have casual and easy relationship with God. I.e., it seems that God talks to them on a regular basis and they don't see anything unusual about this. As I say, we're not told that there are any ritual preparations that they have to perform. We're not told that some of the prophets of old, that they're lying down in a trance. As we're sometimes told about prophets, you see about that about Prophet Balaam, whom we probably won't have a chance to talk about here in this class, or other prophets later, let's say Ezekiel, who are in some kind of trance-like state when they receive a divine message. No, they're just walking down the road and they're talking to God. God talks to them. And the narrator, usually called J at this point, by modern scholars, and the narrator thinks this is a perfectly natural, perfectly normal kind of thing. In one passage here, the word Navi is used. Navi is the Hebrew word for prophet. Etymology is unclear and literal meaning is debated. But the word Navi is usually translated prophet, P-R-O-P-H-E-T, and namely as a man who, or it could be a woman, or according to the Talmud, there are 7 female prophetesses in the Bible, but won't go there right now. It's usually a man. A Navi, a prophet, is a man who stands in some ongoing relationship with God, receiving revelations, receiving messages. Key thing being intermediary, bringing divine messages to people and bringing people's pleas or prayers back to God. That's what the Navi does. And in one passage, Abraham is called that a Navi. So the narrator understands that this role of patriarch as intercessor, as holy man in touch with God, can be construed as the Navi, the same word that will be used to describe Jeremiah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the big prophets, whom we'll read about in coming weeks. Prophets are not merely messenger boys carrying messages back and forth. Prophets also intercede. That's the classic function of a prophet. Disaster threatens. And the prophet uses his connections with God, this is how the narrators describe this, connections with God as a way of trying to put in a good word. The most famous of these scenes is the scene about Abraham and Sodom, or Sodom in Hebrew, in English, Sodom. Right? This is chapter 18. So messengers, the angels, or somebody, 3 somethings, 3 gods, 3 angels, 3 messengers, I'm not sure what they are. They come to Abraham in Genesis chapter 18, right? And they say, we're going to destroy the city of Sodom because they're very wicked. and the city is going to be wiped out. So what does Abraham do? Abraham says, God, you sure you want to wipe out the whole city? Aren't there righteous people? There must be some righteous people in the city. You can't destroy a whole city with righteous people in it. God says, you're right. If you find 50 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. And God says, okay, if I find 10 righteous people in the city, I won't destroy the city. Well, that's the classic example of the prophet, in this case Abraham, arguing with God, bargaining with God, interceding with God on behalf of a group of people about to be destroyed. How does the story end, class? Are there 10 righteous people in the city? No. Barely a one. It's Lot, Abraham's cousin, who it turns out is not such a righteous guy. He sleeps with his 2 daughters later on in the story. Not a very pretty story. Right. So even he, the most righteous man in the city of Sodom, trust me, you wouldn't want to trust your minor child to him. So, but okay, so God destroys Sodom. So that was Abraham's pleadings were in vain, were futile. But that's the job of the prophet, right? To intercede with God. Okay, this is very striking. You know, God speaks to the prophet, and the prophet doesn't say boo. It's as if this is perfectly normal. The moral order applies also to non-Israelites. True, the function of the focus of these stories is Israelite. As I said, Abraham is the progenitor of Isaac. Isaac in turn Jacob. Jacob, the 12 sons of Israel. 12 sons of Israel. There's the people of Israel. But of course, there are non-Israelites who come into the story from time to time. And the narrator makes it clear that he believes, or he expects the reader to believe, that the moral order applies to them also. So Avimelech is one of those kings who is tempted by the beauty of Sarah, and then again later on also by the beauty of Rebecca, right? And is much tempted by her. Maybe he takes her off to the palace, thinking to have his way with her. Not to worry, the heroine's virtue is protected. But Avimelech doesn't say, well, you know, I'm not an Israelite, so hey, we can sleep around. You know, Israelite notions of modesty and propriety don't apply. I'm not an Israelite. The answer is no. God's going to kill him. Because he knows that it's the wrong thing is to take the wife of a married woman. You can't fool around with a married woman. And Avimelech doesn't disagree. His argument is, I didn't know she was married. He told me it's a sister. I thought she was available. In other words, the moral order applies to non-Israelites also. And similar to the people of Sodom, right? Just like in the flood narrative. God's going to wipe them out. Why? Because they're evil and wicked. People of Sodom can't get off by saying, well, nobody told me I'm not supposed to be wicked. Again, the narrator assumes that the moral order applies to non-Israelites too. And we will see this, especially when we get to the prophets. This theme has not gone away, and we'll see it again. Next major theme among these themes that we see in this narrative. There is a repeated promise that the land of Canaan ultimately belongs to Abraham and his descendants. This is the beginning of this very mysterious motif that we find in the book of Genesis and indeed throughout. The mysterious motif is, we Israelites are not of this place. We are here in the land of Canaan, but we don't come from here. We come from somewhere else. Where do we come from? Well, we're foreigners twice over. First of all, Abraham, our remote ancestors, come from Mesopotamia, as we would call it. They call Ur or Haran. Never quite sure which town they're from. Ur or Haran was somewhere over Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and then they got here. And after they got here, they left and went to Egypt. And they come back from Egypt to here. So we are foreigners twice over. We are not of this place. We come from somewhere else. And then how do we get this place? We conquered it. Now, class, I'm calling that a strange story. Why do I call that a strange story? Because if you wanted to tell a people's national origins, Is that a story you would want to tell? No. I'll help you out here. No, it's not. The story you want to tell is, we've always been here. We've never not been here. This is our land from the creation, from the day of creation and onward. We are autochthonous. That's a fancy word. We are autochthonous. We come sprouting up out of the ground. Just like the trees. We've never not been here. Instead, the Israelites tell this really weird story that we're coming from somewhere else twice over. In fact, the second time around, we were slaves, and we were freed slaves, even more ignoble. So it's a very odd story of national origins. But that's the story that the Israelites tell, beginning with Abraham. Abraham wanders by God's command from Ur, or Haran, to this place, the land full of Canaanites. And when he gets here, God says, someday this land will be yours and your descendants. Why do the Israelites tell such a strange story? Well, should we give the answer now or have to wait? Why do the Israelites tell such a strange story? We are not of this place. We come from far away. We've conquered this land from the Canaanites. We've kicked them out. In fact, we were supposed to wipe them out, but we really didn't do a very good job of that. We just sort of blended in with them. But anyway, I'm not giving you the answer already, but we came and took this land. All right, we'll come back to this when we talk about the conquest story in the book of Joshua. In brief, the answer is because the Israelites were Canaanites. I need this story to make it clear that we're not Canaanites, because in my heart of hearts, I know and remember that we really are. We need to work out our own identity. We need to other the other, but the other is us. So the only way I can do that is tell the story that we're coming from somewhere else so that we make it clear that we're not really Canaanites. Why do we want to be Canaanites? Because Canaanites are yucky. Canaanites were cursed by Noah. Canaanites are just plain yucky people. They do all kinds of barbaric things. They sleep with their mothers and they burn their babies. So we Israelites need to reassure ourselves that we're not Canaanites. So we tell these odd stories about where we come from. Our progenitor Abraham, he comes from long ago, far away. The Israelites insist that we conquered the land of Canaan, even though, as we'll see in the book of Judges, it's pretty clear that they didn't. They never did. It's a conflict between the book of Judges and the book of Joshua. All right, too much information there. Okay, moving right along. We have a covenant or a compact, a treaty, a brit between God and Abraham and his descendants. I already spoke about that, except that the key point I need to mention here. The people of Israel were the only people of the ancient world who told this strange story that God, that they are attached or related to their God by a treaty, by a compact, by a deal. Fancy word for which is covenant, or Hebrew brit. In other words, the relationship between Israel and its God is not natural, it's constructed. God says to Abraham, here's what I'll give you, dot, 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 and here's what I want from you, dot, 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 dot. Deal? Abraham says, deal. Is that the way for a people and a God to get together? That's almost as odd as saying, we don't come from this place, we came from far away and conquered this place. It's almost as odd as that. what would be a much more natural story to tell? We're here, have always been here, and our God has always been here, and this has always been my God. It's not that the Egyptians wander into Egypt and then take on Ra, or that the Babylonians wander into Babylon one day and decide to take Marduk as their chief god. No, Marduk and the Babylonians have always been an item. They've never not been an item. The Egyptians and Ra have always been together like this. You know, there's never not been. But the Israelites, not so. That is also very odd. It's an odd bit of Israelite theology, and it's probably connected with this idea that we're coming from somewhere else. This land is not originally ours. And this God, well, until Abraham came along, this God was universal God, but it wasn't the people of Israel. We didn't have a God. It wasn't the people. All these things have to be worked, arrangements have to be made. This is an extraordinarily fertile idea, which the ancient Israelites make their own. As far as I know, it is unparalleled anywhere else in the ancient Near East. Well, if you find a parallel to this somewhere, let me know, because I don't think you'll find it.
You have individual kings.
Individual kings, of course. Because, yeah, exactly. I, Hammurabi, all the kings, right. Kings always claim to stand by divine right. Which king has said he does not reign by divine right? Find me such a king. That's different. I'm talking about the people. Okay, last and most interesting point in these, excuse me, didn't mean to say that, is that the narrators do not, when they tell these stories about Abraham and about his descendants, they don't make the Israelites, take three. When narrators tell stories about Abraham and his descendants, they don't make the patriarchs into Israelites, i.e., they don't make them conform with later patterns of piety. So, for example, all the patriarchs build altars everywhere, whereas according to the book of Deuteronomy, that is verboten. Even according to the book of Leviticus, if they're making sacrifices, it is verboten. But they do it anyway. Abraham marries his half-sister. Well, Frank, that's a tricky one there, whether he's telling the truth or not. Look at that passage. See, if he's telling the truth and it is his half-sister, then she is forbidden to him, according to the table of forbidden relations in the book of Leviticus. Jacob erects a sacred pillar, which is also prohibited according to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Jacob marries two sisters, Rachel and Leah, which for sure is a no-no in Leviticus. Footnote, for sure, not so sure. That's a tricky verse in Leviticus 18. But, okay, whatever. Jacob marries two sisters. Key point, aside from circumcision, Genesis 17, and the reference to the forbidden eating of the sciatic nerve, the narrator does not go out of his way to tell us that the patriarchs, observed the Sabbath, didn't eat pork, observed what later on will become distinctive Israelite observances. They're just not there. Now that is interesting, because if I were a narrator, or for example, if I were a Jewish Sunday school teacher millennia later, of course I will depict Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as if they were Jews. But this narrator does not depict Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as if they are Israelites. They depict them as forerunners, progenitors. But they're not depicted as exemplars of living Israelite piety. Now, is that a good argument for the date of these stories? What do you conclude from that? This means the narrator probably lived before all these distinctive hallmarks of Israelite piety had emerged. Because surely, if he lived after these hallmarks had emerged, surely he would have made the Israelite ancestors conform to these expected patterns of behavior. The fact that he doesn't do so is proof he must have lived before. Is that a good argument, class? Well, yeah, it's an argument. Can you think of a counter argument? Of course you can. Can you think of a counter argument?
He wanted to appear as though it was written back then.
Oh, you're devious. That's good. That's good. Right. He deliberately knows that you would think that he would make it conform, so therefore he doesn't make it conform, so that you would think it's earlier than it really is. Clever. I think a little too clever, but okay, that's possible. Anyone else? I got 1 minute left. Anybody else? Well, the answer I would say is that there's nothing wrong with that argument. All these things, just arguments, right? We don't know. I don't know how to date all this stuff. Where these J and P come from, I'm still completely confused. When R is, I'm not sure. When Israelite piety emerges in these things, where all these laws come from, I don't know. There's one mystery compounded with another mystery. However, it's very possible the narrator intentionally is not depicting the patriarchs as conforming with Israelite piety, because he may well believe not that the Israelite ancestors have to behave like Israelites, because after all, there is a dramatic moment coming up in Exodus chapter 19 and 20, when the Israelites stand at the foot of Mount Sinai and receive what Christians call the law. So people who live before, quote, the law, the narrator might say, it's perfectly reasonable that they're behaving in ways that are not consonant with what will later become normative Israelite piety. That's the whole point. They didn't get the law yet. So I'm going to leave that one sub judice, before the judge. No verdict. Don't know how to deal with that. Okay, last Genesis chapter 22, the Akedah, not much to say about that. Okay, so, bye everyone. Have a lovely weekend.
Oops. Okay. Stop share. Okay. Unmute, 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 unmute. So one of the things Kugel says, he was talking about Abraham and going back to the question of why Abraham. And Kugel quotes to some extent one of the Jewish scholars, a guy named Philo, but and what he says is the importance of the text and of all scripture lies below the surface in the hidden allegorical meaning. Abraham here really symbolizes any soul looking for God. And the argument's based on the fact that he was a Chaldean, and the Chaldeans in ancient times were known for their knowledge of astronomy and astrology. Back then, they were both the same thing. So they were, and some theory that's the wise men from the east sort of thing. So Abraham, in due time, being a Chaldean, it was presumed, and this is all sort of speculation, but they due time turned his back on that study and then turned to God. So the interpretation is that, you know, the story of Abraham is an allegory about turning from the concrete to the spiritual, which I thought was an interesting way to look at it. So does anybody have any thoughts on it?
I think it's because he said yes.
What?
I think it's because he said yes. We don't have any
Okay.
idea how many other people God asked first, but Abraham said
Good point.
yes.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. He's the first one that listened to God. Maybe God talked to other people, but they said, so what? You know,
Yeah.
ignore
Yeah,
it.
no, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Kind of the question of how many people did Gabriel ask before he got to Mary?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope he
I
asks.
stole that idea from my wife, I'll be honest with you.
We can hope it was consensual.
So, but I think, Dave raises a good point.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there's so much we don't know about, like he said, when it was written, by whom, where.
and I guess what it's trying to tell us, I mean, as Christians, it's like he talks about, Paul makes a great stock on faithful Abraham, his faithfulness and his willingness even to sacrifice his own son, which has obvious parallels.
And I, like he mentioned one place, I think the main thing here maybe too, all through Genesis, the main story is to just establish the lineage, who came from who, where.
Yeah.
Just gets it started. Where's the beginning? Well, this is best what we know.
Okay. Carol, you're smiling.
I just, it's sort of a sign that I'm not totally with things. I smile out of context sometimes.
Oh, okay. No, I thought maybe you thought it.
I love the idea of Abraham as a man of faith who just said, who was willing to say yes, take a chance. I mean, just heading off into the wilderness without any idea of where he was supposed to go or where home would eventually be. I think there's that element in most of our lives. And that's all God needs from us, is to say yes. He can do the rest.
Amen.
Nancy?
Oh, nope. I was just saying amen to that.
Oh, okay.
Carol, one of the things that made me laugh is when he said Canaanites are yucky.
Yeah.
I mean, I did not expect that to come out of this.
But his point is that the Israelites created these stories really to hide the fact that they were Canaanites. They evolved from the Canaanites.
Yeah.
Like you said, they othered the other. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say good night, folks.
Okay.
Very, very interesting session. He's remarkable, the knowledge he has. Oh, well,
Yes.
good night.
Yes. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, so I guess with that, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess he really never pinpointed, like, are these things mythic, legendary, or true? And in other words, we don't know. I guess he's just leaving it up in the air that we just don't have the information to tell.
Well, and then the mythic thing is, we talked about that at the beginning. The important thing about a myth is the word historicity. I mean, the fact that it happened is irrelevant to its status as a myth. So Paul Revere for Americans is a mythic story. Now, Paul Revere really did ride, and it really did happen. But it's also part of, it's one of our stories that sort of identifies us as a people. That we have these stories, quite a few of them. They're really happened, that bind us together as Americans as part of our identity. So the fact that's why he's really focusing on it's outside the historicity of it.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. He's basically saying these things happened. He doesn't have all the details or when.
Yeah.
And those aren't important to what he's trying to convey.
Right. Yeah. The importance of the story is really in what meaning are people attaching to it.
Yeah. How do they see it?
Yeah. Like the importance of the Paul Revere stories. What meaning do we as Americans attach to that story?
Yeah.
Or Abe Lincoln or whatever.
Or Washington and the cherry tree.
Yeah, that one's not only a myth, but it's also probably false.
Yeah.
I was struck by the idea of the Israelites entering into a contract with God.
Yeah.
Now, do we enter into a contract with God? Would baptism be like a contract with God?
I don't know. I'd have to defer to the pastor.
Okay.
Hey, Mayor? Need to turn your mic on.
What's that? Oh,
We don't do that because baptism is also a gift. But one of the things he was saying about the covenant with Abraham, we don't get that Abraham had to agree to it. Whereas when we get over to the 10 Commandments, that's another covenant, but we have to agree to it. They had to agree to it. Abraham didn't have to agree to it. He still was going to have a son by Sarah, and he still was going to get the land, whether he agreed to it or not. And as we read the story, you know, Abraham didn't do anything to get the land. It isn't like he went in and worked hard and put up fences and, you know, he just got it. It was just a gift. And that's what baptism is for us. It's a gift. We don't do anything. It just, God just comes.
Yeah,
So,
I got it.
thank you. Because I think the covenant or the contract, the way he describes it in contract, I mean, the legal thing with a contract is it's basically a promise in return for a promise. So so that's what, for instance, you know, the covenant is that, you know, the people promised one thing, God promised something. There's an exchange. Whereas really baptism is an act of, I guess it's a symbol of grace, right, Mayor? Stop me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's sheer grace.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I better stop before I get in too deep.
yeah.
Anita, do you have any thoughts?
I agree with that. I don't think it's a contract with God. I think God handed down some freedoms, and we took it by our grace. You know, it's a gift, like Mary said, it's a gift. It's for us to have. I think the terminology that we have today for contract is a little harsh.
Right.
Yeah. I think that we're looking in today's terms rather than into the terms of at the time that this was supposedly written or narrative.
Yeah.
It's more like a covenant.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think anything that God offers us is free. It's free for the taking. It's, as Mary said, it's his grace and his mercy that gives it to us. It's our sometime inadequacy or our lack of understanding that we don't accept it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so we will meet again next week, same time. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
too.
you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Enjoy with the family and friends.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.